In Numbers 36, the last part of the Parsha Maseh, something interesting happens. The heads of the family return to the allocation of Zelophehad's inheritance to his daughters, Mahlah, Tirzah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Noah. In Hebrew, the text beautifully shows the difference between the economic care of the family heads, the inheritance assigned to us by fate would be taken from us, and the spiritual, religiously inspired response of Moses. The latter speaks of an unbreakable bond between the tribes and the inheritance assigned to them. Land is not a tradable object, but a divinely appointed space in which a tribe can develop its talents and character. Below, I want to show how that works, thanks to Zvi Weissler, who gave me this idea. And even when the Israelites celebrate the year of Jubilee, their share will be added to that of the tribe into which they marry, and their share will be subtracted from the ancestral share of our tribe. No inheritance of the Israelites may pass from one tribe to another, but the Israelite heirs, each one of them must remain tied to the ancestral part of their tribe. The final Parsha of Bamidbar revolves around 3 verses that express the core of the conflict in direct speech: an economic complaint, a casuistic response, and a general rule of law generalized from the particular case. The family heads formulate their concern in the language of quantitative shift. They shall become wives among other tribes of the children of Israel, and so their inheritance shall be subtracted from the inheritance of our fathers, and added to the inheritance of the tribe into which they are taken, so something will be taken away from the lot of our inheritance. 36:3. The key verb nigra, from gara, literally means to be scraped off, taken away. The image is that of something scraped off a surface, reduced. The root yasaf in vinosaf indicates addition. The inheritance is seen here as a sum in which shifts take place. What one tribe gains, the other loses. The family heads further specify their concern in verse 4, where they call the year of Jubilee. Their inheritance will be added to the inheritance of the tribe into which they are taken. And from the inheritance of our father's tribe, their inheritance will be taken away. This is a crucial observation. The year of Jubilee, which elsewhere in the Torah, Vayikra 25, functions as the great corrective mechanism that returns sold land to its original owner, offers no solution here. The year of Jubilee restores individual sales, but not a marriage-related transfer of inheritance between tribes. So, the family heads identify a real gap in the system, not an imagined threat. Moses' answer operates on a different level and uses a different register. He pronounces a divine command. This is the word that the Lord has commanded concerning the daughters of Zelophehad. Whom they see fit may they marry, but only within a clan of their father's tribe may they marry. 36:6. He then formulates the general rule. So shall no inheritance pass from tribe to tribe. 36:7. The verb tisov primarily means to turn around, to circle, to change direction. It is a verb of spatial movement, not of accounting mutation. Compare Joshua 6, where the Israelites go around Jericho, vayasovu et ha'ir, or Exodus 13:18, where God makes the people go around by the desert route. So Moses reframes the problem not as a matter of quantity, but as a matter of place and bondage. The second verb, yidbaku, from dabak, means to adhere to stick to. It is the same root as in Genesis 2:24, v'dabak be'ishto, and Deuteronomy 10:20, ubo tidbak. This root almost exclusively describes covenant relationships, marriage, worship, faithfulness. The fact that Moses chooses this root to describe the bond between tribe and inheritance is a theological choice. The inheritance is not appropriated, but adhered to. After all, it has been assigned by fate, i.e., by God, to a tribe in order to develop its spiritual potential. The classical commentaries further nuance this picture. Rashi explicitly states at 27:8, Shalot tisov nahala, lo nitztua ela le'oto hador bilvad. The commandment that the inheritance should not be passed around was commanded only to that generation. For Rashi, the provision of 36:7 is therefore not an eternal law, but a temporary measure that applied to the generation that took possession of the land, because any shift in inheritance between tribes would permanently disrupt the carefully established division. The Talmud, Bava Batra 120a, confirms this, Davar ze lo yahan noheg ela bedor ze bilvad. Also interesting is the discussion by Rav S.R. Hirsch. Hirsch notes in verse 3 that the conditional right of inheritance granted to daughters in Bamidbar 27:8 implies that the inheritance accruing to them, in the absence of brothers or their descendants, passes after their death to their sons, or, according to some views, to their husbands. See verse 11 there. When the husband, and therefore also the children resulting from that marriage, belong to a different tribe, the inheritance is transferred from one tribe to the property area of the other, which is why the inheritance right granted to daughters is generally called ha'avara, transfer there. If the daughters of Zelophehad now married outside their own tribe, and this right of inheritance with all its consequences were applied to them, then such a ha'avara would already take place during the tribal division of the land. In fact, if they now married outside their tribe, and before the partition died leaving behind descendants or possibly their husbands, then at the partition, a portion of the land that had been allotted to the tribe of Manasseh by divine decree would have to be allocated to another tribe. In verse 4, Hirsch adds that such an assignment would completely amount to a direct allocation to the other tribe determined by lot. It would not be a temporary alienation, as can occur through sale, for example, but a permanent withdrawal and alienation of the property that actually belongs to Manasseh, because Yerusha, inherited property, unlike sold property, does not return even in the year of Jubilee. Hirsch also notes that the family heads of Gilad speak of a shortening of Menahalat Avotenu, the inheritance of our fathers, and not of Menahalatenu, our inheritance, a choice of words that, according to him, reflects the underlying logic of the distribution system. The land was the generation that entered the land Ba'ei Haaretz, assigned only as an inheritance of the generation that came out of Egypt, Yotzei Mitzrayim, compare 26:55. At verse 8, Hirsch points to Bava Batra 111a, where from the formulation a daughter who inherits an inheritance from the tribes of Israel, in the plural, the legal rule is derived that children have exactly the same inheritance rights when inheriting from their mother as when inheriting from their father. A daughter whose father and mother belong to different tribes becomes an heiress from two tribes upon her death. Subsequently, 112a, the question is discussed whether upon the marriage of such a daughter entitled to heir from two tribes, the alienation of the maternal inheritance must also be taken into account, so that the husband to be chosen, both from the mother's side, must be taken into account, which as on the father's side, should belong to the same tribes as the daughter, or that this consideration disappears upon marriage, because the alienation, Shek Pavar Husaba, has already taken place at the time when the inheritance passed to the daughter of the paternal tribe. This issue also shows, according to Hirsch, that absolute prevention of tribal alienation of heritage could in no way have been the intention of the law. Ramban argues from a related but differently emphasized point. He writes, Lo chashasha katuv ela letaken ha'et hahi, umi yochal letaken bisman et asher avato. Scripture was concerned only with restoring that time, i.e. that particular situation, for who would be able to put right in time what has once been disrupted? Ramban emphasizes that the Torah deliberately did not want to stipulate that a son-in-law or husband would be generically excluded from inheritance. She, lo ratzta Torah, la'akor mishpat Yerusha, because the Torah did not want to uproot the right of succession. Ramban also refers to Bava Batra 120, and notes that it is quite possible that in that entire generation there were no heirs other than the daughters of Zelophehad himself. Hence the commandment is formulated exclusively for them, and for that generation. The difference between Rashi and Ramban is therefore not that one would interpret the inheritance as economic, and the other as sacred. Both recognize the temporary nature of the law. The difference lies in the motivation. Rashi formulates it as a halachic fact, Ramban as a practical necessity within a unique historical phase. Hirsch can be quoted here with a paraphrase of his exegetical style. His attention to the moral and pedagogical charge of individual verbs makes visible how the shift from gara, yasef, to sabav, dabak, is a shift of register, from quantity to place, from possession to connectedness. When these precisions are taken into account, the contrast between the two grammars becomes not weaker, but stronger. The family heads see the inheritance as a movable quantity within a closed sum. Moses and the later Halakha partly recognize this economic logic, but place a relational requirement on top of it. As long as the division of the land has not yet been definitively determined, each individual must remain attached to his tribal inheritance, not because ownership is unchangeable, but because the one-time, fate-determined allocation of the land to the tribes, Ach begoral yechalek et haaretz, Deuteronomy 26:55, is an order that should not be shifted lightly in the vulnerable transitional phase of conquest. The Hebrew reveals this contrast sharply, and the classical commentaries, properly read, show that this is not a metaphysical opposition between property and sacred identity, but a temporary, practically motivated freeze of hereditary mobility in the service of a one-time, unrepeatable task: the just and permanent settlement of the 12 tribes in the land.